and welcome to Telewizja Republika. We start off with a report from Microsoft claiming Russia is ramping up a disinformation campaign targeting the Paris Olympic and French President Emmanuel Macron. According to Microsoft's Threat Analysis Center, Russian groups Storm 1679 and Doppelganger are using fake videos, news stories and AI-generated impersonations to damage the reputation of the International Olympic Committee and incite fear about the Games. This includes a fake documentary and AI-generated audio of Tom Cruise. Ukrainian forces have launched precision-guided strikes on targets inside Russia using US-made artillery. Just hours after receiving the green light from Washington, London, Paris and Berlin, Ukrainian forces targeted Russian artillery systems, troop concentrations and major bridge with M42 missiles fired by M270 and HIMARS rocket launchers. The strikes began early Sunday morning and both Ukrainian and Russian sources confirmed the attack. While Russian media reported civilian damage, independent sources indicated significant damage to Russian military bases and equipment, including the destruction of an Iskander-II missile system. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed the strikes and stated that Washington still restricts deeper attacks into Russia with more effective weapons. In Crimea, the Atish partisan movement has reported a significant increase in Russian military activity. Russian troops are now using the previously abandoned Zavodsk airport in Simferopol for military purposes with frequent air patrols throughout the day. The partisans reported that military equipment and personnel have been accumulating at the airport. Additionally, increased activity has been noted at the Russian military base in Rozdolne, where a unit of the 3rd Radio Engineering Regiment of Air Defense is stationed. The buildup indicates Russia's strategic focus on fortifying its positions in Crimea. Ukraine's energy situation has worsened due to recent Russian attacks, nothing new, and high temperatures increasing electricity consumption. Volodymyr Korditsky, head of Ukraine's state grid operator Ukrenergo, said on June 4th that rolling blackouts lasting for up to 8 hours are being implemented due to power deficits. These outages have affected several regions, including Kyiv. Since the start of 2024, Russia has launched 6 major attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, causing over $1 billion in damage. You can join us on Rachon.com, that's our website. You'll find our Substack account over there. You'll find our YouTube channel over there as well, so you can leave us your email if you do want to be our subscribers and receive our reports via email. If you do want to stay in touch with our videos, click subscribe button on the YouTube channel. If you do want to be in touch with Telewizja Republika, find us on YouTube as well. 1.14 million viewers of Telewizja Republika, and you can be one of them, especially if you do want to work on your Polish language, because our television is a Polish-speaking television, apart from about 1 hour of our English-speaking feed every day. That's what we are going to talk about on my show. My name is Michał Rachoń. This is Rachon. And we roll in.
Are you ready? 3, 2, 1, go!
We haven't seen Rip Rawlings for a while, but he's back on Rachon. Rip, great to see you again. Lots of very interesting things are going on the front lines of the war against the West, and looks like the Russian war against Ukraine is also going on in Africa, as we were informed by Kyiv Post and some other outlets. Could you try to explain our viewers what are Ukrainians doing in Africa on one hand, and what are they doing in Syria, for example, if we are talking about the war that is going on the outskirts of Kharkiv last days, or in areas that we know as the places occupied by Russia, and as the front lines of the war are basically the front lines of the eastern Ukraine?
I mean, it's funny because we like to talk about a lot of strategy on your show, which is very encouraging because you get a chance to see some of the bigger picture. I think there's some smaller pieces in here to talk about also. And to me, there's some good and some bad out of this. I mean, immediately, if you're a fan of Ukraine and you're supporting and supportive of what Ukraine is having to go through, this is encouraging to see that they're taking the fight to the Wagner mercenaries. The good thing I think we can say is sticking it to the Russian guy in other locations certainly strikes some fear in the hearts of these kind of heartless mercenaries, if you will. And I think, at least puts them on notice that, hey, look, I don't care where you are. We're going to come after you and we're going to kick your ass. And by the way, it's going to hurt. So don't join Wagner, which I'm not sure. I know they've got a very shortage of people going in anyways. But, we've said it a couple of times on your show, which is there's two things I'm fond of talking about, which is number one, war is complicated. This is not really an easy thing to digest. There's some difficult components to this. And the other adage I'm fond of saying, which is war really sucks. It's not a good thing. It's not a fun thing, no matter how you slice it. So, the good part, like I said, we've just mentioned, sticking it to the Russian guy in other locations puts Russia on notice. It makes them spread their forces. If Russia has to fight Ukraine in different locations, by the way, the kind of gloves are off over there in Syria. We're seeing a lot of very brutal combat, very reminiscent of what I dealt with over in Iraq and Afghanistan, IEDs, convoys getting attacked. It's kind of the rear area stuff that we've seen for many, many years, kind of the insurgency type stuff. But, the other aspect of this is it does hearken a broader war. The fact that Syria and Bashar al-Assad is getting attacked in his own country. Obviously, he's dealt with civil wars. He's dealt with, Russians coming in and helping him for a while. He dealt with the Americans helping him for a long time. I certainly remember a lot of support going over to Syria when I was in Iraq in 2006, 2008. I'll never forget a heart attack moment, if you don't mind me kind of quickly waxing poetic about something I experienced in war, but I'll never forget almost shooting down an aircraft, which is pretty much unheard of in this day and age, at least when the American forces were fighting in Iraq. We were fighting predominantly insurgents, but I had coming from Syria a white 2-engine prop plane that was flying maybe 400 feet off the ground. And one of my guys spotted it well in advance. We all trained our weapons on it. We had some heavy weapons, 25 millimeter over to 50 caliber. And I was on the radio up to regiment asking for permission to shoot this thing down. Long or the short of it is, we never heard exactly what it was. I imagine it was probably one of our own little green men over in Syria having a chat with some of those guys. It did have a tail marking, which I took the numbers down and sent it up to our headquarters. It's one of these mysteries of the battlefield where you're never exactly sure what's coming over from Syria. But my first impression was it was something we didn't want over there. Syria at that point had been helping the insurgents a lot, or at least letting foreign fighters in their country. So we were not too thrilled with what was happening. And, a plane flying overhead directly over me from Syria was something I was very concerned of. But anyways,
I imagine that this plane came through or didn't it? Yeah. So
right over the border.
Okay.
Directly over the border. So Syrian border was here. We were here, and it flew from the Syrian border over our heads. Yeah, and I thought, the only thing that stopped me
sorry, let's stop for a second because it's fascinating. You are a commander of a unit. You are in contact with your supervisors. Right. Looks like you got, I don't know, 30 seconds, 1 minute, 5 minutes to make a decision whether you are going to shoot the thing or the thing you have to consider it, or the thing rams you
combat is like that. There's a tremendous amount of mental gymnastics. I'm fond of saying it's the highest of all sports. Because you have to use everything. You're using,
and you are a sportsman, so you know what you're talking about.
Every bone in your head. You're using everything that you got. Obviously, kind of tongue-in-cheek there, but yeah, it was less than 5 seconds. My mental gymnastics in 5 seconds were pretty good. They still are. At the point I called up to the regiment, one of my guys spotted it. Said aircraft. It was at about a 3 o'clock position from where we were oriented. I looked at it, saw it, called up the regiment, and received nothing in response. They were pretty responsive, but I think they were flummoxed as well. I talked to a guy, one of the operations officers later, and he said, yeah, they had no idea at first what it was.
Wow.
But I had 5 seconds. I trained in on it. And the only thing that stopped me from pulling the trigger, just like another time that I saw a tank on the battlefield, which is worth mentioning some other day, but was the fact that I thought, okay, first of all, the insurgents have no planes. Second of all, it's coming from Syria. It's got to be something that's one of ours. Meaning if it's cleared into our airspace, even at 300 feet, we've got things that are looking and watching. But
Yeah.
I'm used to things not, even as a reconnaissance officer, I'm used to kind of the word not filtering down to my level. So you do deal with oddities on the battlefield, and you have to think very quickly. But my thoughts were, don't pull the trigger. My guys were ready. I think we probably would have taken it out because it was that low. A 50 cal against a slow moving prop plane can do a hell of a lot of damage, but we thankfully chose not to, based on my assumption that it's got to be something of ours that we just didn't know about. So it was
that's actually the case with a friend of mine who used to be in the military. He always told me when we were dealing with some totally different stuff that the military rule is first you make a contact with someone who knows and then you shoot, and do not mix the things that you do one before another.
It's funny because I do remember vividly everything from that moment. And I remember in the 5 seconds that I had to decide, I radioed higher headquarters. I talked to my men. I said, stand by to them. And they were all stand by. I could see every weapon in the whole, all my battalion or all my company trained in on this thing. And I also thought it can't have bombs. I looked at it and its profile to me was, even though it was kind of thick on the underbelly, I thought, unless it's got some kind of munition, in which case we're toast. It can't have any kind of munitions. Now I did think if it strafed us, I mean, I hate to say this, but I thought game on. I was kind of excited maybe to be the first guy on my block to take down an aircraft. But we had a lot of firsts. I was the first one to find a working flamethrower in the hands of the insurgents, a Type 80 Chinese manufacturer, which was reared up and ready to go, hooked up the propane tanks. Thank God we got it before they used it. I also had a tank in Baghdad. I came up over a corner and there was a Russian T-62 with its barrel pointed directly at me.
Wow.
And I called up to my gunner and said, gunner, tank, direct front. All my Cold War training took over. And he trained in on it and was ready to fire. And this thing was ready to fire on us. And again, 3-second mental gymnastics. The insurgents don't have tanks. Got to be one of ours. Had no idea that the...
How close were they? Yeah.
It was about 400 meters. It was within killing distance for both of us. I mean, well within either our lethality. I mean, his round would have gone right through me. I would have fired until we were done out of ammunition. I would have fired 42 rounds of anti-tank on the guy and probably taken him out. There is records of 25 millimeter penetrating a T-80. But so anyways, it was, I thought, okay, must be something I don't know about. And sure enough, the first tank guards unit of the Iraqi army had been stood up that weekend and no one had told us. It's like, would have been nice to know as a kind of a Cold War guy. We trained against Soviet stuff. So seeing a Russian style tank on the battlefield, I instantly
it raises some instincts
it was,
on the battlefield.
Anyways, but
this is something very interesting, because based on the videos that were revealed by the Kyiv Post, we are actually seeing the footage that is very similar to footage that we saw during the insurgencies in Iraq and Syria back then. Does it mean that we are having a kind of, I know it's not a guerrilla against guerrilla, but it looks like the Ukrainian forces over there use the techniques and the tactics that are being used in those conflicts against those players who are active there on the Russian side?
No, absolutely. These are the same tactics used against me. It's so familiar. I can smell the explosives when I'm watching the videos of these things, because they're giving me, a lot of memories of stuff that we dealt with. I've been hit by a lot of IEDs, and these videos are remarkable in that sense, is that, this does look a lot like what happened. It is rear area attacks, meaning you have a lot of these frontline units, normal conventional forces from Bashir that are out there that are fighting, and they have vulnerable places because when they're in their own rear areas where they have become familiar with kind of resting and recouping, that's where they're most vulnerable. And that's certainly where we were hit in Iraq and Afghanistan. But yeah, so the tactics are very familiar. I think the larger aspect of the kind of war sucks part of this, though, is that what I worry about, and I think there is reason to be concerned, is that this harkens an expansion of the conflict. And many military minds, many perhaps much smarter than me, have done some analysis on this and said the war in general is broadening. And I have said since December on your show of last year that I'm very worried about this year, 2024. I think it's going to be extremely bloody. And I believe that Russia will make gains. I didn't predict how far, because that's relatively unpredictable. I think if you have anybody on your show that says, I can tell you exactly how much ground the Russians will achieve or whatever, They're just full of themselves. But I will say they have made a lot of ground. Kharkiv right now, 70% destroyed. Very discouraging, having been there a couple of years ago, not in Kharkiv, but nearby, at least supporting refugees from that region. And this is utter decimation of that area. The refugees we have with us, by the way, right now that are staying with us are from Sumy region. And I believe that's going to receive kind of the next thrashing, if you will. But, you know, to the larger point of this, the fact that we have Ukrainians and Russians fighting in other countries is very reminiscent of World War II. I think we can kind of look back at the Condor Legion, which was the Germans moving into Francisco Franco's Spanish Civil War, where they sent Nazi aircraft and tanks and men to fight. Obviously, the famous painting Guernica coming from that, I've seen hung up in Spain. Beautiful painting, by the way, by Pablo Picasso, but obviously very scary. Kind of the beginning of fright or scare tactics against civilians to try to disrupt the military. The Italians did the same thing in Ethiopia in 1936. And it was a precursor to a larger war. It harkened to
and we had it of course as well during the Cold War, and we have a memory of people who are running away from the communist country, from my home country, Poland, trying to go to the places where they could fight Russians and Soviets, and they were doing it in Africa. And this is also something very similar, because we are having Russian mercenaries from the Wagner group who are opposing people who are sent from Ukraine to fight them over there. What is the meaning of what is the reason for which Ukraine, because I believe this is a part of a larger Ukrainian military effort, what is the meaning of attacking Russian assets in Africa by Ukrainian units or volunteers, whatever you call them?
Well, I mean, the first starting point for why is directly from the Hura commander's voice himself. He was quoted and quoted widely, you know, we're going to take the fight to Russia wherever they are, and Wagner specifically. And so I think we have to take him at that word, which is he intends what he says. However, you know, behind him, as you suggested, is a larger strategic design. There's a larger paradigm, which is why? Why would you then do that when you're obviously pressed for forces in your own country to fight against Russia? And the reasons, as I mentioned before, are partly to scare Wagner and say, we'll get you where we can. But I also think it's partly to ensure that Ukraine, from a strategic standpoint, stays in the front and center on the world stage. Now, if I were Zelensky, this is what I would be doing. It's, look, don't forget about us. I know there's a lot going on in Israel. I know there's a lot happening over in China right now. This is a great time to be an author of books about China, by the way, because you don't need to go much further than Taiwan to see that, you know, internationally, this is a very fractious period. Also, to kind of use a phrase from the past, this is kind of a powder keg period where if you light a fuse in certain regions, there will be an explosion. And I think right now, you know, from President Zelensky's perspective, this is the right thing to do to put the other forces on notice. From the rest of the world's perspective, it's very, very frightening, because it could be other powder kegs detonating in our face and causing this war to be less than regional and kind of broader. Now, if you're Zelensky, then I'll be honest, you don't mind it, because you're all in right now. This is a global war to you. You know, you're fighting tooth and nail. Your capital is getting hit by missiles on a day-to-day basis. I keep in contact with my friends in Ukraine who are being hit in Kyiv. One of the families we have we're going to bring on board as refugees. We, like I said, would love bring refugees from war over here to get a bit of respite, 2 years under the Unite for Ukraine program. Any of your viewers, by the way, that would like to sponsor somebody, to make a shameless plug for a U.S. government program, the Unite for Ukraine program will allow you to bring over a Ukrainian family for up to 2 years, which, you know, look back in World War II and imagine bringing some Polish families over. I've told you my family is from the Poland, Germany area, and we're refugees in the 1920s. And I always think about that when I think about what's happening, which is bring some folks over for a bit of a break, give them a chance to get back on their feet, because the war is not going so great, and anything you can do to help.
And Rip is doing it. I do not want to get into details. If Rip wants to do it, he will. But he's not only saying this; he's also doing it. So thanks, Rip, for you, for your family, for doing exactly what. I
appreciate it. Yeah, we founded a charity, Ripley's Heroes. We just got our 3rd medal from the Ukrainian government. We're very proud of. So just a few weeks ago, our representative in Kyiv accepted the medal on behalf of Ripley's Heroes. She is the senior representative for Ripley's Heroes. We're 501 here in the United States. We're also a full-blown charity in Poland and in Ukraine. And so we're very proud of that moment. I mean, it's not about medals. We try to do things kind of in quietly.
But it's very important, Rip, but it is very important to give a credit, to mention it, to shout it out, because it's been, well, the third year of the war. You are in it from the very beginning. You are helping people, and it's worth mentioning because it's not like it was 3 years ago or two and some couple of months when the whole world was interested in what was going on over there. So it's even more important to say it and say thank you, and I'm saying it.
Natalie, our representative in Ukraine, sent pictures. We sent over 550 children's coats, and she sent pictures of all these kids last winter. And there's nothing more heartening. I mean, kids in war. I dealt with it in Iraq. I dealt with it in Afghanistan. I dealt with it in North Africa. And, you know, there's very little besides, I think, violence against women that gets my dander up. But for God's sakes, you know, when you see kids in the middle of this conflict, they didn't ask for it. They didn't want it. And for me, that humanizes the conflict. I've never had a question as to who are the good guys and bad guys. But if you look at the faces of these young children caught in the middle of it, it should be apparent to anybody that, you know, that sees it. But anyways, I will say, I think if you look at, you know, kind of getting back to the strategic point, the Condor Legion in World War II, to me, was a frightening part of that conflict. Obviously, those people who survived from that period will remember that it did spell the spilling out of, you know, the aggression from Russia and from Italy, to see what happened in Ethiopia and what happened. Italy declared Ethiopia a protectorate. I think it was the Ethiopian Italian Empire, if I got it right. And the Italians, by the way, got summarily beaten. So they did not do very well in Ethiopia, but the Germans did remarkably well supporting Francisco Franco. So I don't know where either of these two kind of spillages will go, but if you're Ukrainian, you're pleased to see Ukrainians sharpening their knives in other places. If you're
and Ukraine
the rest of
is
the world,
trying
it's very worrisome.
is trying to bring the war to the territory of Russia, which is understandable. You and I were discussing it from the very beginning, that even those weapons that were transferred to Ukraine under certain conditions, and the conditions were not to cross the border of Russia, and it in a way changed in the last weeks. My final question tonight, because we do not have much time, is the question of what is the reason for which actually U.S. decided to let Ukraine use at least part of those deadly weapons that are finally transferred to Ukraine outside of the territories Ukraine was allowed to use it before?
Well, so there's a couple reasons, and I think we have to look at the political reason first, which is this is the reason I think that this year is very dangerous, not just because of what's happening in Ukraine, but also China. It is a very fractious election period here in the United States. You could not pick a election that is more contentious in the past 20, maybe 40 years, maybe even beyond that. The U.S. is deeply divided, and I think the world alongside with it. You know, America does a lot of things that kind of leads the globe, whether we like it or not, and a lot of the world is divided among the same political lines that the United States is right now. And that's typically when larger other countries try to do bad. So Russia is seeing their opportunity. They know that, you know, either President Biden is a lame duck or whatever the case may be, if President Trump will be reelected, in which case, basically from November to January, they have a sweet spot to do as they will. And I would surmise leading up to the election, meaning probably starting as early as September, they will start their move because they know that the election will be relatively set and they can tip the election. At that point, they don't care because they know that they can get away with a lot. So that's the first reason. Is I believe President Biden has said, look, based on best military advice, if they're at the cusp of, this is Ukraine, at the cusp of taking terrific damage from Russia in this season coming up, let's acknowledge that fact and let them hit targets that would hit them, meaning air bases, mustering locations, places where you have fuel and oil, obviously only military locations. Now, the minute that one of these shells or you know, munitions hits a civilian area, we've got a lot of trouble because it's a U.S. manufactured weapon system that has hit a Russian civilian location. That becomes very, very worrisome. So, yeah, that's the first one is political, but I believe the second one is militarily, which is Ukraine has said over and over again. President Zelensky very clearly has flown into the United States and sat down with the president and said, we are at a tumultuous, difficult period. Please do whatever it takes. And by the way, I can't sit on my hands anymore. My generals are telling me we have to strike these targets. They can attack us with complete impunity from two sides. That's from the Belarusian side as well as the Russian side, and perhaps somewhat from the Black Sea. And you have tied my hands and said I can't strike these targets, whereas he can continue to attack us in our country at will. So it's a no-brainer from the Ukrainian perspective. From a U.S. perspective, a little more of a head scratcher, but I would suggest both political and militarily, we've chosen to take that step. And it's again back to what we said: is this a broadening of the conflict? Yes, it is. U.S. manufactured weapon systems landing in Russia is a broadening of the conflict.
Yeah, and this conflict was asymmetrical conflict in a way that we didn't think about asymmetrical conflicts in the past, because Ukraine couldn't use the weapons that they had in their possession against the opponent that did not have this kind of limitations. Rip, thank you very much for your presence, for your expertise and your knowledge. It's always great to hear from you, and always great to hear your stories of your personal experience on the battlefield, as we had a chance to hear it today.
Always thrilled to rock on with Rachoń.
It's always a pleasure. You can find Rip Rawlings on Substack. You can find Rip Rawlings on social media. Try to find Rip and try to give a support to his activities, Ripley Heroes, so you can join the support for Ukraine in its fight for its sovereignty and independence during this Russian invasion, going on for more than 2 years by now. See you, Rip. Thanks a lot.
Take care. Good to see you.
Ciao, ciao. Bye. Ladies and gentlemen, you can join us on rackracon.com. That's our website. You can find our Substack account over there. You can leave us your email. You can also find our new YouTube channel and click subscribe button so that we can be in touch and you can be informed about each upload. If you are not watching Telewizja Republika online, what you can also do on our Polish channel Telewizja Republika. 1.14 million viewers on YouTube, mostly in Polish, but during the night in Poland, you can watch our English feed as well. See you soon. We come back with this program tomorrow. Ciao.